to the ranch. Dr. Uptown here. I was going to do a video response to James Yeager. I happened to catch his video on 1911's suck, and he said he made some very valid points, and many of them are totally true. The 1911 typically is, by today's standard, is certainly an under capacity firearm. Its original design was 7+1. A lot of the current manufacturers now are making an 8+1 round magazine to give you a total capacity of 9. But compared to the XD or a Glock, it certainly is well under capacity of those, particularly for the size of the firearm. And as far as reliability goes, they can be unreliable. That is true also. One of the points that he brings up is during his firearm instructions, folks that use 1911s tend to have problems and tend to have misfeeds or failure to ejects and such. And those are possible things that happen. They also happen with Glocks too. One of the reasonings behind that is typically most Glocks don't require any break-in, whereas a 1911 does. 1911 typically requires 200 to 500 rounds of break-in period when they're new. The reasoning behind that is because the tolerances are over tight, which he states, and that's true fact. That's undisputable. So, but I tend to wonder how many of his students that are taking their 1911s out there have actually completed that break-in process. Of the 1911s I have, most of my failures have happened within that 500 rounds of break-in period. This particular one had several before I hit 1,000 rounds. Since it's had 1,000 rounds through it, it's had no malfunctions whatsoever. Anyway, I wanted to make a few corrections to some things he said in the video. One of the things that he brought up was that the 1911 originally did not have a grip safety on it, and that's actually incorrect. Go back in history a little bit. The 1911 was an evolution of the Colt model 1910, and what the 1910 was missing was the thumb safety, not the grip safety. It had the grip safety on it. It was actually missing the thumb safety, and I'll show you a picture of a 1910 that I took at the Woolaroc Museum display. And it clearly states on the card that is in it that it has an experimental thumb safety as well as an experimental grip panel on the side that you can't see. Now, continuing with their history lesson, with the model 1910, when it was originally presented to the Ordnance Department for testing and qualifications, John Browning made the trip for the first day of qualifications only. And the reason he chose that day was because the first day of qualifications consisted of a 6,000 round, basically what we would call a torture test these days. They loaded up magazines and fired the pistol continuously until they completed the 6,000 round test. During that test, the 1911 experienced no malfunctions whatsoever. And the only reason that John Browning had shown up for that test was to make any minor modifications that might be needed on that first day. After that, he never attended the rest of the trials. After the testing was done, the Ordnance Department was the one that actually brought up the fact that they wanted to add a thumb safety to it. And the reason behind that was because with the holster that they were using at the time, as you would go to unholster the weapon, the grip safety would be engaged. And it was felt at that time that it was just too much of a chance of an accidental discharge happening while someone was pulling the pistol from the holster with the grip safety already engaged. So they wanted the addition of the thumb safety added to that. After that was added and it was tested with thumb safety in place. It was adopted in March of 1911 and became the model 1911. Now, I've heard the same stories about the earlier GI models being inherently inaccurate. The problem with it is you don't hear those stories from the people who were out there available to fire the original ones, because none of them are still alive. By the time World War II rolled around, the 1911s that were already in service were already pushing 20 to 30 years of age, and oftentimes had probably already been re-arsenaled at least once. During World War II, we ran into the same problems that James had mentioned, that the 1911 was a pistol that was built by craftsmen, was never really able to be adapted to the true mass production ability, I guess you'd say, that you would expect, just simply because the parts did have to be hand fitted, and they still do to this day. And so even though specifications were set up, the problem with the specifications were, depending on which factory you were at, you had a different set of specifications, because each factory built their own specifications. They were never really able to settle on a single set of specifications that allowed for a true ability to mass produce the pistol without having to have that fine hand fitting done. And as a result, you have what you have. One of the other finer points that came out as I was doing some research for this was when John Browning was there and the pistol was going through its 6,000 round course of fire, there were a number of times that the pistol became so hot that it was unable to be handled with the bare hand. John Browning's solution to that was simply to dunk the pistol into a bucket of water and then continue on with the trial. Now, I have seen some torture tests with Glocks where they certainly have continued to work after 1,000 rounds. However, that was at the cost of melting down guide rods, and while it was never said, the possibility of some frame damage too. I've never seen actual frame damage from a torture test like that, but I have seen the melted guide rod. Yes, the pistol did continue to function, but it continued to function damaged. Whereas with the 1911, I don't know. The record doesn't state whether it was damaged or not. But by cooling it, by simply dunking it in a bucket, certainly is a testament to durability. Another thing that he mentioned was that users would remove the arched mainspring housing and replace it with a flat mainspring housing. Again, this is incorrect. The arched mainspring housing did not appear until the 1924 A1 revision of the 1911. Prior to that, it was a flat mainspring housing, and not only was it flat, but it had no serrations or checkering on it. It was totally smooth. Another thing that appeared on the A1 revision was the inletting here just behind the trigger on the frame. Prior to that, that was a squared off cut, just similar to this area here, squared off and not actually inletted in to allow for smaller hands to grip the pistol and shoot it. As far as inaccuracy of the early ones, he's probably absolutely right. I mean, after all, these sights suck, but they're the typical GI sight, and they're a lousy sight. They're really not designed for certainly pinpoint shooting, but really not designed to shoot anything human torso and just hit it somewhere, not necessarily shooting it with kill shots. Beyond that, I mean, I can't really argue with a lot that he says in the video. You know, sure, I'm a 1911 fan, but I also own a Glock, and I don't find that my Glock is any more or any less reliable than my 1911's. I also own Springfield and Smith & Wesson, and the thing about it is it's a mechanical device, and any mechanical device is prone to failure of some sort or another. Now, he mentions his students, because of their ego, saying that this misfeed or failure to eject or whatever the malfunction happens to be isn't a malfunction. That's because of lack of education on the student's part, not because of pride in the weapon. It's true. I mean, if you stovepipe around, that's a malfunction. If you fail your feed, that's a malfunction. It's just all there is to it. It's a malfunction. But I've had failure feeds and stovepipes in my Glock too. I've also had them in my Smith & Wesson M&P, and I've had them in my Springfield XD. It's going to happen because it's a mechanical device. You're going to have some failure. Anyway, thought I'd give you a brief history lesson and make some corrections to your video, James. Other than that, I found it fairly interesting. Honestly, it was relatively correct. The 1911 is an undercapacity firearm for what it is. But let's see how those Glocks are doing in 100 years. And of course, neither one of us will be around to find out, but I'd be curious to see how the plastic frames are holding up after 100 years. And that's not just for Glock. I mean, that's on any of them. My XD has a plastic frame. Both of my Sigmas have plastic frames. My Beretta PX4 is a plastic frame. Let's see how any of those plastic frames hold up to the steel guns in 100 years. Hope you guys find this interesting. We'll talk to you later. You have a good day.